All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the 5th episode of the Balboa Park Online Collaborative's Dreaming of a New Collections Management System. For those just tuning in, my name is Alex Kron, and I am the Digital Projects and Collections Specialist for BPOC. We are a nonprofit technology consultancy for cultural institutions. We are based out of San Diego, California, but provide services to institutions around the United States and beyond. Here with me, we have BPOC's Consulting Executive Advisor and President of Stimler Advantage, Neal Stimler. Here is my co-host.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you. Welcome.
Now, today's episode, we'll be discussing the use of cooperative or consortia-based software as a service models for collections management. Many cultural institutions around the world wrestle with the challenges of cost and the complexity of implementing and supporting the right collections management system for their organization. Shared service models can help address these challenges, and I, for one, am really excited to learn more about how the Association of Nova Scotia Museums and the Connecticut League of History organizations have worked with collective access to implement these models. So before I introduce our panelists, I just want to mention that we will be opening our discussion up for a Q&A at the end. Please put any questions you have in the Q&A section and feel free to comment and discuss in the chat. So now please welcome our panelists today. First, we have Karin Kierstead. Karin is the manager of the Museum Evaluation Program for the Association of Nova Scotia Museums, and over the past 19 years has worked with museums and heritage organizations in 4 provinces. She provides advice and support to museums across Nova Scotia as they prepare for their evaluations, manages the collective access database systems that feed novamuse.ca, and actively assists museums in improving their museological practices in all areas of their operations. Her work on novamuse.ca earned ANSM the 2013 Canadian Museums Association Award of Outstanding Achievement in Management. In 2018, she initiated a national discussion group for museum associations and government agencies that deliver database services to museums in their provinces. Karin is an expert on information standards and collections management and regularly provides advice to heritage groups across North America that are interested in online collaborative projects. Next, we have Diane Lee. Diane is the Connecticut Collections Project Coordinator for the Connecticut League of History Organizations and also the Collections Manager at the Fairfield Museum and History Center in Fairfield, Connecticut, where she started working with collective access and the consortium model in 2016. Previously holding the Collections Manager position at the Connecticut Historical Society for a number of years, her experience has included everything from database management to cataloging and digitizing 2D and 3D material, overseeing collection moves, along with construction projects involving HVAC system upgrades. She believes in putting order to the chaos of museum and library records by organizing and bringing together their information in a straightforward and rational way that allows us to more easily find and tell the stories of our collections. Last and certainly not least, we have Seth Kaufman. Seth is a developer of open source software for data-centered humanities, cultural heritage, and biodiversity initiatives. His background includes training in civil engineering, computer science, and graphic design, all pursued at the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art in New York, where he also taught digital design and programming for 7 years. Since 2003, Seth has been the lead developer and architect of Collective Access, an open source application for museum and archival collections management that is in use in scores of institutions across North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. So now I am going to turn it over to Karin and Diane, start our discussion.
Thanks, Alex. Wow, we have a lot of stuff to talk about. I think before we dive in, I'll just share with everyone our motivation for being here today. The 3 of us, had listened in on earlier webinars and been hearing the frustrations and some problems that museums face in talking about the collections management system they're using and what they wish it could do, what drives them crazy. And we were sitting there scratching our heads and sometimes vocalizing, but that shouldn't be a problem. It's not a problem for us. We love our database. We love the model that we are operating under. So we reached out and thought we should maybe share that with you. So that's why we're here today. I'm going to begin by talking about how things started in Nova Scotia. So I am with the Association of Nova Scotia Museums, and we are an association that supports the work of museums. We do not have a collection ourselves, unless you talk about our reference library, but we help museums very hands-on, very proactively manage their collections. And those museums are small, definitely small by American standards. Small operations, some of them are entirely volunteer run. Some of them might have one staff person seasonally or a staff person year round, 2 or 3 people if they're lucky. And then other than that, they rely on volunteers to do this work. So basically what happened in Nova Scotia in 2002 is that, as you see on this map, 18 of these community museums that were open year round and did have, at least one full-time staff person, they started having a conversation about what would happen if we banded together, if we started working together, formed some sort of cooperative, collaborative initiative. They started having this conversation because there had been talk in the province about a new database for the provincial museum. And somebody tossed out the idea that there would be like a database light version of that to give to the community museums for them to use. And then once this was standardized, maybe we could do some cool collaborative projects. Maybe this would just be a really big help for the field. But those were the conversations that were taking place. Government priorities shift, things happen. That database light never materialized, but these museums had started, contemplating what that might mean for them, and said, you know what, I think that maybe we should go ahead and start a cooperative. So they did that, and they had a custom-built Microsoft Access database that was very basic, and looking back on it now, very ugly and not super intuitive, but that's what they used as their first stepping stone, with the goal at the time to be eventually move into a proprietary system that had a few more bells and whistles. But at that point, they wanted to get their feet wet with just database work in general. A different kind of collections management for a lot of them. They were shifting from paper-based to databases. And so they looked at bulk purchasing and working together and starting to build up a real network as a co-op. So that was the big question. What would happen if we do this? Everybody agreed to get on board, and this is what happens. Everybody else sees the value of the work and they want to get on board as well. So it quickly grew from 18 community museums to we're now at 56, and we hit 50 within 2 or 3 years of that cooperative launching. This was launched by one museum. They agreed to spearhead the project, and obviously their mandate was about their community. So it got to a point where they said, you know what, this needs to be managed by an organization. This has grown so big, it's working so very well. So those museums, that grassroots initiative, they approached the association to take over this program and deliver it as one of our services. And that's how it ended up with the association. So the roots of this are very much in the hands of the museum. It is very much their idea, their program, and we have worked very hard to keep it that way. So what happened with that poor old Access database is that it started to die after a certain amount of time, and we found that Collective Access was the only database that actually checked all of the boxes for us. We did a database review. We went and met with every single one of the members and talked about their likes, their dislikes, their wishes. Let's not think about money. Let's just think about what you want your database to do and where you want to use your collections, where we want to go in the future. Let's dream really big, and then we'll see what we can do. And that's what led us to Collective Access. Seth thought this sounds like an interesting problem to solve, to work with this number of sites to come up with a model that would work for everyone, and that's that's where we are now. So we still stuck with that cooperative model. Going open source felt like a really good fit because of the cooperative nature of the program. We loved the idea of helping others whenever we do an update or develop, sponsor a new element of the database, then that can become accessible to others, and of also benefiting from others that do the same thing. And then we launched NovaMuse a year after we migrated all of those databases, which is a whole other story. But it was that easy, and also an insane amount of work to roll that out.
Yes.
I will take a break from talking now.
I should just interject here and just say Collective Access is the software that both Connecticut and NovaMuse, Nova Scotia, are using. It's open source collections management software. And as Alex mentioned, we started in 2003, believe it or not, building this. It's gone through many iterations since. But at its core, it was meant to be an open source museum and archival collections management system that stressed flexibility. You can set it up any way you like with all sorts of, any arrangement of fields, any arrangement of records, everything can be interrelated together. So you can really model it and configure it to adhere to whatever standards you're using, whether they're accepted standards or just in-house kind of standards that you're stuck with, because of the history of your organization. In the case of NovaMuse, and as we'll see with Connecticut as well, it was about kind of continuing on with that from that access database, but with some improvements, but also not shaking the, stirring the pot too much, so that people didn't feel, didn't have too much to deal with, because we were going to a web-based platform. And the software is still open source and free. You can download it and deploy it yourself, or we can help you do that. It's up to you. But ultimately, it was about just kind of making a system that was web-based, accessible to all, and could live on a server and centralize things. And we'll talk more about, I guess, the advantages of this later. But I just wanted to mention kind of what collective access is. Anyway, so Diane.
So I, as was mentioned in the introductions, I'm the project coordinator for the Connecticut Collections project from the Connecticut League of History Organizations. We formed basically a consortium, and hitting a lot of the same points that Karin was talking about. And she had a really cool map, so I had to put up a really cool map too of all the groups that are participating in our project right now. You can't really see the outline of Connecticut, but it's there. And we hit most, like, a pretty wide ranging spread of the state, which is pretty cool. So this started from the Connecticut League of History Organizations, which is been around since 1948. It was formed, and it basically exists to, and you can go to the next slide, Seth, too.
Oh, sure.
It basically exists to build connections between the history groups and organizations in the state, promote best practices, serve as a communication hub, do a lot of peer-to-peer networking, just be there as a resource for a lot of the groups. Connecticut has, I want to say, 126 towns, and pretty much every single town has some sort of historical society, history organization in it. So even way back then, there was a need to kind of be able to bring people together and give them a resource. So you can, statewide organization. A few years ago, probably back in 2012, 2013, we were talking to a lot of the members and kind of thinking about strategic planning for the organization, what our members actually needed beyond having the old school gatherings and picnics and field trips and things like that back in the 50s and 60s. What did they need from us? What did they want for their organization? A lot of answers from the feedback that we got included organization and management of their collections, digital preservation for their collections, as this was becoming a new topic. One of the things they talked about too is an alternative to some of the higher cost software and the proprietary software. They didn't know what direction to go in, what should they invest their money in, and when they did that, were we going to be able to continue to give them support and guidance? Where would they go for that? And that kind of thing. So we started thinking about this and how we wanted to try to help our members. Some of the things that we had to take into account for them were a cost, and you can go to the next slide, Seth. A cost for what we could help these people do, like all these members that were already in CLHO. Should we kind of gather together and see if we could do something to provide something for them or give them guidance, because the cost be systems and equipment costs, ease of access for them? Would it be something that would be contained in their institution? A lot of the issues that they had were lack of resources and lack of time, and the expertise and technology and current systems that were out there, because we have a lot of, kind of what Karin said, we have a lot of small institutions that are all volunteer, and they're awesome, and they do such good work in trying to save a lot of the stuff in their collections and do outreach for their own communities. But they're volunteer, they have other stuff going on, they can't really devote a lot of time to it, and especially trying to research new technology, current systems, and all that. So in, I think it was 2013, 2013, the state did a digital resources meeting at the state capitol. Tons of people there. It was really cool. I was there, not at all anything to do with this at the time, just with my previous job. And there was a presentation by this collective access group that was talking about open source software. And up until that point, and even a little bit after, I'll say, I was not a big fan of open source type things and stuff in the cloud. I wanted my server in my building where I could have say over what happened to it, and was still a little bit leery. But I'm watching this project and I see this thing that Nova Scotia is doing in the Nova Muse project with all this other stuff. I'm like, this is a really cool idea. I really like that we're able to do this. And the, at the time, director of CLHO basically had the same thought. She really saw a potential in this and had the foresight to start thinking of maybe all of these institutions that I've been talking to, if we pull them all together, we could do something really great that would be available to the whole entire state, and figure out how to make this work for everybody and be a resource for everybody.
I think the reason we wanted to show this map is this model. When it first started, and when we first started talking to others about the model, I know when I was at conferences, I got a lot of, you did what now? How did you got them to agree to do what now? They're working together and they're using the same system and they all agreed to that, and how, like, it just seemed impossible to people. But what we have seen is that even if it's not that, like, our model really was that grassroots, this idea came from the museums. The other institutions that have since modeled our model have done it as more a top-down approach. It's an organization that has made the pitch to the community saying, hey, we've seen this done elsewhere. What do you guys think? Would this be helpful to you? And it's growing and growing and growing. So we wanted to show this map of collective access users, but all of those big dark dots are where you see those consortiums. They're in Manitoba, they're in Saskatchewan, they're in the Yukon, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Minnesota, Connecticut, and others are talking about it. I won't name names because they're at different points in the process. But in Canada, for sure, this is now a nationwide approach model. And I know I've talked to other groups in the States that have been putting out feelers as well and starting to just think about, like, oh, okay, well, could we do this and how would it look for us? Because every state, province, territory is going to be a little bit different, or city network, or whatever it happens to be. But it's happening. All right, Seth, now I'm ready. Okay, so how does this really work? First, I want to give you an idea of scope, because when we talk about doing a lot with a little and taking advantage of the leveraging power of a cooperative approach, the Association of Nova Scotia Museums, ANSM, as we call ourselves, we have 3 staff people, and that's it. So keep that in mind. We are managing this program on behalf of 56 museums with 3 staff people, and we're not all working on this project. We have many projects on the go. So this is a membership program that people can subscribe to, that they can buy into. They pay an annual fee. It's $350 right now. And that lets us deliver the program, you know, a basic program for the year, but we also use that money as matching dollars for grant applications. So we're always on the lookout for a grant that would let us sponsor, you know, the latest either database upgrade, maybe we have ideas on, or some kind of special project that would benefit all of the members. We don't just dream up these ideas on their own. We have a peer-based advisory committee that also informs these decisions and, you know, brainstorms and shares their ideas. So it really does follow that cooperative model. This is not us dictating anything to the members. Everybody's in on the decision making. We have a support person that is basically half-time, I would say, on the project. So they provide support. They answer questions, they deliver training. We handle the backups. One of the things that we learned early on before we were in collective access is that the museums struggled with any of that technical side of the work. So backing up their database, I don't know how many times I got a call from someone who'd say, yeah, I think I just deleted my database file, or they had somebody else delete it on them. There were issues. Anyway, that's probably a therapy session. So we would end up having to drive out or mail out a CD, or, you know, just basically reinstall the database file for them, which was obviously not a sustainable delivery model. We can't always just hop in the car in the middle of winter and drive up to, you know, Northern Cape Breton. Nobody can drive through Northern Cape Breton in the middle of winter. We had difficulties sending files back and forth and having people understand, even with really clear instructions, how to reinstall those files. So when we switched to this web-based model, it made everything so much easier for us to manage, because it's just, here's your URL, here's your username and password, here are some different tools to help you do it. We're going to do training sessions virtually or live, and everybody just understood it so much easier, and it removed a lot of the barriers that had existed before. We deliver virtual and in-person training. It looks at all aspects of collections management. We provide access to different resources. And when I talk about that, we basically look for special opportunities and partnerships and programs that are exclusively available, because this is a membership program. So our advisory service members get to tap into these projects. We have a partnership with a museum studies college, and so their students actually get to do some real work in these records. The museums agree to it. We have a memorandum of understanding with the college, and so the students get to do some proofreading and a little bit of, you know, web-based research. And so these museums that are, you know, 1 or 2 people or however many volunteers, that they feel really stretched. They feel really thin in terms of their resources and their time and opportunities to actually do collections work. They feel like they've won the lottery when we say, hey, guess what? It's your turn. We're going to have these students go in. They're going to check out these records. They're going to make improvements and give you suggestions on how to improve your collections management practices moving forward. That's an award-winning partnership. The students love it. It's not a theoretical partnership, which is how it came about, because the college was saying, we need real world experiences for our students. They need to understand really what they are walking into when they are walking into the museum field, that this is not going to be as rosy and perfect as they think or hope it might be. So that's a very cool partnership that we have on the go. And I'll stop talking now.
So we did basically exactly what Karin said. Our project went from the top down. So we let them do all the work of the grassroots and everybody going, what are you going to do? And we decided as CLHO to try to figure out how to do this, kind of building on that 2013 meeting. And our director at the time called up Karin, I believe, and had chats with her to find out what was going on and how this worked, and talked to Seth and all that. And it was a big question of like a business model of how could we do this? How could we make this cost effective and sustainable and figure out how to make it work for everybody because of that scale of we wanted to bring in larger groups with, you know, lots of professional staff to be able to help out our smaller all volunteer organizations. So we ended up doing a sliding scale based on people's yearly budgets. So even the organizations that are paying the higher end of the scale, so I put the chart up, which is $2,500 a year, is still a lot of the time less expensive than some of the really bigger Cadillac model systems. So they're still having to pay less than they normally would for something else. Whereas our smaller groups, you know, if you're all volunteer and have no budget, it's $300 a year, which is usually doable for them. The yearly fees cover server space, training, support. I was going to say, when this was first brought up, we did a grant for this saying, we're going to do this great project. We applied for this grant. We didn't get the grant. Partially, I think some of the feedback was, you're going to do what? And they didn't believe us either. So a core group of the folks that were interested in this came on board for a pilot project, and they invested some of their own funds and are now, that group is actually grandfathered in and does not have to pay the yearly membership fee. They have it for life as the benefit of putting in a big chunk of money originally. So they did a lot of the work on this during 2015, I believe, maybe a little before, to kind of talk to a lot of the members of the group, find out how we wanted, because it was open source, they could figure out how they wanted to change it, what they wanted to tweak on their own system, on this own system, versus just getting something out of the box. 2016, the pilot was instituted, which is how I fell into it. I just happened to start at an institution that was one of the pilot groups, and immediately jumped into it and was like, this is fantastic. This is just a great model, and all these other groups are doing it, and we're all together. This is amazing. So started doing that. So far, the sliding scale thing seems to be working well. We've only technically been having new members join since 2017, so we're still pretty new to the whole thing. So we'll see how it continues on, but so far the sliding scale does seem to be working well as we've been moving on. And of course, we always still want to get the higher budget, bigger groups in, so we get that like higher level. But so far so good, and we haven't had a lot of pushback from the yearly fee at all. Who wants to do collections management and open source?
I'll get on the soapbox for this one, I guess.
Okay.
Sort of jumping off on what Diane was saying, one of the things we really recognized in this work is our responsibility as organizations to use our funds in support of our communities, to use our resources to serve our communities. And when we look at a lot of the proprietary systems that are out there for collections management, they do have some big costs attached to them and some strings attached to them. And the more we looked at that, the more we talk about that, I think the easier it is to recognize that when we talk about our social responsibility, we need to start including collections management in that conversation. When we talk about how we can best use our resources to serve our communities, if there is an opportunity for us to embrace a different model like open source for our collections management, and that frees up other resources for, you know, whatever the community needs happen to be where you are, then I think we have a responsibility to seriously look at that. That's a conversation that it's just starting to take place, but it's one that we are trying to reinforce and talk about the long-term benefits of an approach like this. What we do with our membership letters when they go out is we always do a comparison of the benefits of being in our membership program compared to a proprietary system that I won't name, but that is, you know, widely used, and we look at what they offer and how much that costs versus what we are asking and sort of break it out that way. So the services always end up being, we're delivering way, way more value for your dollar than whatever proprietary system is that you might be buying into. And it's also a lot more sustainable because it's open source, so people are actively building in this, not just Seth and his team at Whirl-i-gig, but other developers out there that are using it and have that technical capacity that a lot of these small to medium-sized museums just don't have. They can then benefit from that constant renewal of this web-based system instead of having to go back to the proprietor and say, well, I need this tool, or the database can't do that. What can you do about that? Well, that's going to cost you X amount of money. We basically put in requests to the forum and say, we had an idea. What do you think of this? And then it gets into that wish list of projects, and we do see those updates happen. That's all I'll say about that one.
Yes, I would want to add, just in terms of open source, because we've been saying this a lot, and open source in and of itself is not really like what you guys need. It's a license. So essentially what it means is we put the software out there, you get both the software itself to use, but you also get the source code. You can make changes to it. And the licensing is free. The only thing our license really says is you can't keep other people from doing what they want with the code. But you can do whatever you want. You could take it, stick it in the box, and try and sell it if you really wanted to. What it means practically, though, is that as a developer of the software, all the work that we do, including funded work through grants and whatever with various users, is also covered by that open source license. So what it means is that any developments that we make to the software and add to the software, everyone gets for free. Goes up, on our website every so often we do a release. There is no closed source or extra cost version of this. What that's meant in practice for these consortia is that they get features that they don't want, they just turn them off, and they get features that they do want. And we're going to show you a few of those that were developed under grants for one user and then given to other places that have run with them. And that's one of the kind of frills of the open source software model. But I would say that part of this consortium model is the idea of open software that's in the continuous development and evolves over time, as Karin said, but also a common data model for your community so that you can actually support it. Because one of the worries, I remember when I first started working with Karin on Nova Scotia, we had 35 at that point, 35 databases. And I was like, that's insane. How are you going to support 35, organizations? And they have. P.S. It was totally me. They've done it for 10 years with very little staff. But the way they did that, I think, one of the key things is that they kept a common model across the community. So everyone was speaking the same language in terms of collections. And that may sound constraining, but if you can make that jump into everyone does this the same way, the support load goes way down and becomes sustainable, even in terms of documentation and everything else. So while the software can support all sorts of different, user interfaces and models and data models for different organizations, different people, and different consortia, you don't need to use a Nova Scotia model, but you do need to use a model. The other part of this I just want to say is that the other value you really get out of this approach is centralizing things like backup, as Karin mentioned, is really critical. It's not just that they have trouble backing up. No one can back up anything properly. It's like the basic rule of this. So the idea of centralizing it in a place where it's centrally administered for these small organizations is a huge win for everyone. And it can be done economically. And that's a topic for another time. And the last thing I want to say is that it's critical that not just be software and servers and backups, but it's also the set of services that CLHO, NSM, and the other consortia providers package around this. It's about also educating all the various members about how to do this, being able to give them support. That's not just like, hey, I'm getting an error, how do I fix it? But also, hey, I just had an intern do 20 records and they don't look right. So it's not just about technology, it's about content as well. So I think that's really the approach is like that whole package of free software, evolving software, server and backups, but also that support model. So that's my part. Thanks for listening.
And on the education part that Seth said, it is a very important part of our overall mission, and it's definitely a part of us talking about open source to people. When I go out and do my pitch to new members and do my sales pitch, I talk about the open source part, and most of the time, most everybody's that has heard of open source is like, oh, it's free. And I'm like, yes, but nothing's ever 100% free, because you do need the server space, the technical space, having to think about that, because it does have to live somewhere, and there is a cost for that. So you may not have to buy a server, a super expensive server for your own building, but you need to purchase the storage space and something for it to actually run on. So I do always make sure to note to them, like, yeah, this is awesome because it's free and all of that stuff that Seth just said, but there is still a cost in that you need to have the ongoing fee structure to be able to support that for everybody. So that's always an interesting conversation. They're like, but isn't open source free? I'm like, well, yeah, kind of, but you need the technical people because you don't know how to do it. So we need the support, both technical and guidance on other things too.
Yeah, what the open source model does save you in terms of cost is you're not paying a vendor every year just to run the software. So, and that's wonderful and great, and let you reroute that money to something to support and things that sustain a community. But ultimately, yeah, there are fixed costs in terms of servers, storage, backup, the fact that people do need to take care of this, things break. In Nova Scotia, our server, generally something goes wrong, on average every 3 years, something breaks where someone really needs to spend time, dealing with hardware or software.
And always when I go on vacation.
Yes, it is always when Karin goes on vacation, or is about to go on vacation, or has just gotten back from vacation. But generally, those costs are manageable. That's what we found really, and this is across not just Connecticut and Nova Scotia, but some of the other consortium providers too. Is that the costs are manageable as long as you're smart about it, and again, as long as you can kind of centralize things and keep things in a standard model for everyone. So, so I guess we talk about the software now. So Karin, did you want to run through some things, or should I?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things here. So with this model, like it really, when we were looking for a new system from Microsoft Access, like I said, Collective Access at the time was the only one that checked all the boxes. There are other open source systems out there now. There are other options. But in highlighting this model, what we do is this is a tool first, and then we do the fun stuff second. So our focus is on building capacity within these museums. We look at fundamental collections management work, how to do good cataloging, how to have control over your inventory, doing digitization, all of those very, meat and potatoes kind of standards. That's really what we focus on first. And because that's what we've been preaching and working on for so long, we've been able to build up and do these really cool projects as a result. So the back-end databases, every museum that participates has their own unique installation of the database. Yes, all those fields are standardized, so everybody's database looks the same, except the collections within them look very different. So the back-end databases then feed NovaMuse, that public website. That's where everything comes together. So thinking of sharing your collection online, if you feel like a small fish in a very big pond, that you are, you've got your collection online, well, how many people are going to go to your website and look at it? This way, all of those little guys can kind of band together, and we've got that power in that large group. So everybody feeds into NovaMuse. They decide what to share, what not to share. And then we're able to do a whole lot of other work as well. So the database also feeds their programming, their marketing, their community engagement, exhibit development, all of those other things. But we focus on building that capacity and collections work first. In terms of its intuitiveness, I think we need to highlight that students and emerging professionals, especially the youngins, they can step into this and find it incredibly easy to use. When I was out training people on the system, I said, hey, that's cool. They're like, I love that it does this. And I was like, yeah, me too. And I'm like taking notes because they've uncovered something that I hadn't found yet. The learning curve is incredibly low with this. That's all I'll say here.
Okay. So Yeah, so one note about kind of workflow is that, or data flow, I should say, is that, there's a core cataloging module that in the consortium model, everyone gets their own system, their own login, their own database. So you don't get to see anyone else's data. There's no cross pollination. They're all running on the same server infrastructure. They're all running in, the same machinery essentially, but they're all partitioned. And that way, again, there is no crossover. However, in some cases, they'll share certain aspects or authority data. So for example, in Nova Scotia, they have a centralized database of manufacturers who've been active in the province over the last, 300 years. And that's something that is managed centrally, but everyone wants to use it because some of these artifacts relate to those manufacturers. So we are able to actually centralize data resources, but everyone gets their own sandbox essentially. Diane, you were gonna?
I just want to say I want to talk to Karin more about that because Connecticut could be interested in doing something like that, both for Karin and Seth. We can discuss later.
Yeah. Similarly, also the software does integrate with online authority. So, for example, if you did want to use the Getty vocabularies or the Library of Congress subject headings, or some of the other authorities that are available online, software can do that. So it's up to you to do that, and that can also kind of democratize and standardize terminology that people are using. That said, a lot of our users use the nomenclature. It used to be called Shenhall, I think, and they keep changing the name. And that's something where, again, it's a shared vocabulary, and that's an example of something we also support. In terms of how you get your data online, since so many users seem to want to publish their things to the world, Karin mentioned NovaMuse, and NovaMuse is a centralized platform. In fact, let me just go and show you what NovaMuse looks like to make it more real. Of course, I picked the wrong one. So NovaMuse is the Nova Scotia platform for navigating all member collections. And one thing to just keep in mind there is that you don't put everything on there. Each user can control which items show up on the portal, and also
which images or media.
Which media, and also even which metadata shows up. We don't show everything. We're not going to show your donors. We're not going to show how much your appraisal values were. We're only sucking specific values that need to be public, and we aggregate it. So we have over 250,000 objects in NovaMuse that are online. Other consortia don't do that. Some don't have any public face at all, and some actually have separate websites for each member. And it's an elective thing that they can add on to their plan, if they want to. So it's very flexible in the sense that you don't need to put things online. You can do it in a collective way. You could do it in a more traditional siloed way. It's up to you. So back to the show. So in terms of making connections between things, and that goes in the front end and the back end as well. We can do things like mapping, and actually, and in the case of NovaMuse, for example, here's a foundry that is in that manufacturer's database with all of the information that we know about that. But then we can also relate it to objects in various collections. So these are coming from all sorts of different collections in the consortium. Digby Museum, that's per se, Love, and if you click on them, you can get more information about them, and also see similar items in various collections. And I think, Karin, you want to talk about this a little more, but we also added, for NovaMuse, for example, lots of interpretive services on top of this collective provincial database. And these were made possible by the fact that we're all using the same vocabulary. And they include things like crowdsourced transcription services, educational interpretive services. So for example, we have a whole database now of educational curricula and resources that not only are available for download, but also relate to specific collection items. Yeah. So anyway, but I shouldn't be talking about this because this is Karin's baby.
We're running out of time, so that's fine. That's what I'm really excited about, though, is like I said, our focus was really on that meat and potatoes core collections management work. But because we've been focusing on that, then when opportunities arise, then we can build up and out, and we now have these curriculum links. Teachers are bringing collections into the classroom. We launched that mid-pandemic, which was amazing, weird timing that just happened to work out. But they're so excited to be able to connect with museums, and not the normal museums. You know, these aren't the big, well-known Museum of Natural History or what have you. These are collections that maybe the teachers weren't familiar with before, stories that are local to their community that they can pull in and use. And that's all coming out of the collections database and then that extension work. We did want to highlight, maybe Seth could live demo very, very quickly. But as I said, this is about capacity building. So I always joke that I've tried to work myself out of a job. I have moved on to sort of a new role with our organization, so I guess I did it. But we want the database to guide the user. So we have built a few little tools into the system to help guide them, including a help menu, which has your FAQs, links to different resources, a contact Ansem page. So nobody should be out there scratching their head, wondering what they should do, how they should do it, but they can reach out to us for help at any time and have the database provide help to them as they are actively doing their work, you know, on their time, their terms. So that's something, and it's something that we have the power to edit this. So again, we don't have to go back and, you know, request to a vendor or request to Seth that we found this or we built this new resource, we want to add it in. I can just go in and edit this, and then it gets rolled out to everybody in real time. We also added a live error reporting tool using intro.js, if I'm getting those initials correct. And what that does is it lets you run a little problem search in your database, and it will just hop you through these different fields that we've defined as, you know, they shouldn't be blank. You should always know how you acquired an object. Show these editor alerts. Here it is. I love this. It just walks a user right through some data cleaning work that, again, it's on their time, their terms. But one of the things we heard from curators very frequently was, okay, if I dedicate half an hour on Friday afternoon to database work, where should I focus my efforts? I don't know where to start. I don't know what would be the best bang for my buck. How do I do it? So we've tried to build in some tools to the system that will actually help them do some cleanup work.
And this is an example of a tool that was built as part of feedback and as part of, you know, a funded project. You know, where as we ran these consortia, one of the consortia said, you know, hey, and actually it was Nova Scotia, said, you know, hey, how can we actually kind of improve data quality? Because some of these sites, they have volunteers and they're kind of, you know, they need more validation rules, they need more feedback. So we built a flexible system that lets you do things like just basically make arbitrary rules on fields, and then either gently or not so gently tell people when they're violating them. And that could be, you know, some even content standards like this field should have no more than 20 words in it because it seems like it's gonna be wrong. This thing needs to look like latitude and longitude, you know, kind of thing. So you can do all these very, very fancy validation rules now, but also you don't need, it gives you, you know, error messages that make sense to a volunteer or whoever your audience is. So it's as simple as, you know, this accession number should not be a duplicate. Oops, you know, this, you know, you really should set this date, you know, or description. Also, we can even do things like alert if you upload an image that's not sufficiently large. If it's less than, you know, 1,000 pixels, we don't, you know, we're going to alert you, because these are things that we've found over time that people do that cause problems downstream. The image example causes problems on the public website because it makes the website look terrible when it's blurry images. So there are things like that. And we also have a mechanism feeding back these things from NovaMuse even back to the user. So when it gets to NovaMuse, sometimes NovaMuse has rules that, you know, say, hey, if you did this, it would look a lot better. And we feed those back to the users as well. So these are things that have come out of experience, but because it's open source, they're rolled into software and everyone else gets them as well. So, okay, let's see. So I know we're running out of time. So Diane, did you have anything else you wanted to hit?
I just will say really quickly on this one, from the beginning of the project, we had 3 things that we wanted to accomplish for this phase, or 3 phases that we wanted to accomplish. The collections management system was our main focus for all of this, is to be able to institute something for all of our members. Then the public portal was the additional aspect of, like, for the ones that wanted to share online, to be able to do that. And there had been concern in the initial discussion about digital preservation. So what we're using, collective access and all that, will back up photos and media files and scans and photographs and all that stuff anyway. But we've also are partnering with the Connecticut Digital Archive in our state, which is one of the feeder for Connecticut up to the DPLA, to the Digital Public Library of America. And because of all the open source possibilities, we've actually built a connector that goes from collective access. Seth, built a connector that goes from collective access up to CTDA here. So our members don't have to do anything. There's hardly even a magic button. There's just one that, like, when they're done, media files get uploaded and get preserved in the CTDA. And then for anyone that has public access items, it further gets pushed to the DPLA as well. So right now, all the main 3 things that we wanted to accomplish, we did. So now we're just looking forward to see what our next steps are to grow the project even more for our members.
Wow. Thank you, Karin, Diane, and Seth, for sharing all of that. The strategic thinking behind all of that is incredibly impressive, and that we have a little bit of time, so I wanted to squeeze in some questions from attendees. Starting with Gary, he has a question for Karin. You mentioned that your association currently has only 3 staff. Was that the case when you first onboarded collective access? How did you develop training materials for collections managers and curators that were likely at very different stages of acceptance of this new consortium and technical preparedness?
Yeah, our staffing has remained fairly consistent. We did restructure, so we had 2 positions that were part-time year-round, and then we merged those. So now we have 3 full-time stable positions. So that's really been the only shift. So our HR has not changed. In terms of how we roll things out for people who are at different levels, this was their idea. So to be honest, that approach of working cooperatively, we didn't have to do any sales pitches early on. A few newer members have had questions about it, like, how does this really work? And so we just talk it through. You know, you put in your money, and there are going to be years where you feel like you're getting just benefit after benefit after benefit, and there are other years where you're going to say, yeah, I don't really feel like I want to tap into that project. It's not super relevant to me. But everybody understands that it does end up balancing out at the end of the day. And yeah, aside from boards, you know, feeling poor some years and having questions about the money, we do not get complaints.
And as far as staffing, it's me on our end in Connecticut, and I'm part-time. So I am about 10 hours a week. The director is full-time, but she's doing all kinds of other stuff. We meet once a week to kind of catch up on where things are. And for my time, some weeks it's more hours than others, and some weeks it's less. So it's basically just me kind of coordinating with all of our current members for this.
In terms of training materials, Seth just shared a link to some different materials that are useful. We did up a manual that was sort of a standard thing that everybody got. And what we've been doing to make it more flexible at this point and cover different levels of knowledge and experience is we've been focusing more on YouTube tutorials. So looking at different features and tools, some of it's very, very basic, and others are more advanced. So you can just tap into those wherever you're at and whatever you need. And a lot of it's very individual, you know, conversations and instructions sometimes as well.
Thank you. We have another question from Gary. I'm assuming this is for all of the panelists. Do you have resources or recommendations for an intensive workshop to harmonize the disparate entities into a common data model for a new consortium?
Karin, well, you know, I guess Nova Scotia, they kind of had one, right? I mean, in other words, it was really just inherited. That work had been done back in the olden times. And Connecticut, I think what Connecticut did essentially was it started out with a relatively small group. It was 5 institutions, and they were like, we'll use NovaMuse, but with these changes. So I was at that workshop. If you want to call it a workshop, it's more like a meeting, like a day-long meeting, where everyone just kind of sat there and said, well, this will work for us, but we really need X, Y, and Z. The important thing, in my opinion, is to not get too far into the weeds. You're going to need to abstract something. usually, collections managers, archivists don't want to lose anything, any knowledge. And I would not argue that you should lose knowledge, but you can preserve things without getting too specific about your data model, where it becomes untenable. What that balance is hard to say. That's the process. So what I would, to answer your question, I think I would say that the key thing is to get everyone in the same room and have something that resembles what you want to look like, what you think it might be, to work off of and to react to. And then also to just be very, very careful about trying to make everyone 100% happy.
Yeah.
Simplicity is your friend, but not so simple that, it's unusable. And that's the balance you need to kind of get to.
Yeah, what I would agree with that. And I would also say, like, what we've done in Canada is we have invited our American friends in as well, is we do have this discussion group for the consortium. So collective access in Canada is what we call ourselves, but we have calls maybe like twice a year, and we talk about some of the common issues. For some of those groups, it's just picking the brains of people who have gone before them and figuring out what elements of those different models, those different groups work best for their situation. You've got to be really open in your communication, I would say.
Excellent, thank you. So we have another question from Christopher. Are the consortiums sharing genealogical data as well? Are you using multi-tree solutions like TNG? Geology information is also quite common across geographical area. Has either group looked at integrating with GIS mapping systems like products from Esri to facilitate property ownership data?
None of the consortia are specifically dealing with genealogy per se. They generally are, just dealing with their holdings at an archival and museum level. In terms of GIS, we don't directly integrate with ArcView, the commercial solutions. We do have basic GIS features built into the software. So you can do geolocation, you can draw shapes on maps, you can even, drop pins and say what direction someone's looking in. So, but these are geared towards describing, say, photographs. It's not necessarily about doing, property line analysis and things like that. You certainly could do that, but there hasn't been a demand for that. And that's an example of something, at least at the consortia level, that, I guess if you had a consortium of genealogical entities, that would make sense. But these are more, historical societies and cultural heritage institutions. So while we do some of that, we don't do at that level of specificity.
And as far as the GIS mapping, not genealogical related, but GIS mapping, we're doing an archaeological project that we just had some of the finds from one of the digs in the past couple of years was put into the system for their project, and we had the lat long for everything, so everything was ticked off in GIS, so it's in the map. Yeah. So we may do something like that in the future to do further analysis, but we have the raw data, and it's really cool to pull it up and look at it. I don't know that that's ever going to get, it's too far back necessarily to get into a lot of genealogical stuff, but it's super interesting.
Yeah, also, I just point out that this software is used in a lot of contexts that aren't, historical organizations and consortia. For example, there are a number of natural history collections that use it for paleontology and geology material. So, for example, you can actually link to online taxonomy authorities for genus, species, and higher taxonomy. You can drop maps. You can actually even fuzz coordinates on maps, which is something that's a requirement for a lot of paleontology projects. They don't want people looting, and archaeological as well. So we do all of that because there are users that are actually doing that. We support, even UTM coordinates, which is military coordinates that are used in geology a lot, Universal Transverse Mercator. We do all of that because we have users that are doing that. Not at the consortia level, though, because we don't have natural history people banding together in this way. But there are models out there you could use to make a consortium that did that.
All right, unfortunately, we are out of time for any more questions. Apologies to those whose questions were not answered. Please feel free to reach out to me if you guys feel like you want to continue this conversation, and I can get with Karin, Diane, and Seth about facilitating that. As for closing, a big thank you to Seth, Diane, and Karin for sharing your time with us today and talking about this topic. Thank you to everyone who's attended and participated in the chat. Facilitating these conversations has been an absolute joy for me. Next month, we will be meeting with Artwork Archive to learn more about their system, and we'll be sending out more information about that session in the coming weeks. Thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend. Take care.
Bye.